This video is designed to review with you the basics of a change in supply. We begin with our standard supply curve, which could be for any product, but in this video is going to be a supply curve for apples. Sometimes something other than the price of apples changes, causing us to want to supply more apples or fewer apples at every price level. An increase in the supply of apples is shown by a rightward shift from S1 to S2. It's important to note that a rightward shift is an increase in supply. Even though S2 appears to be below S1, this is not a reduction. The larger numbers on the horizontal axis go to the right. On the flip side, graphically, something may change, causing us to want to supply fewer apples at all price levels. That would be reflected by a leftward shift from S1 to S3, which we again note with an arrow. In both cases, something has changed other than the price of apples, causing apple producers to want to sell more S2 or fewer S3 at all price levels. The specific variables which can cause this change are listed for you on the right. We know them by the acronym ROTTEN. The R stands for resource prices. These are the inputs used to make that specific product. One thing needed to grow apples is pesticide to keep bugs off. If the price of pesticide goes down, allowing apple producers to make a greater profit on their apple sales, they'll want to sell more. That will be reflected by a shift from S1 to S2. If the price of pesticides goes up, however, eating away some of the profit of the apple growers, they will want to supply less, since they'll have less profit and therefore less incentive. That will be reflected by a shift from S1 to S3. Another aspect of resource prices is government regulations. The government can put regulations on the productive process, thereby increasing the cost. So for example, if pesticides had new regulations regulating their handling, that may drive up the cost for apple producers, and it would reduce the supply of apples from S1 to S3. If, however, government regulations were abolished, thereby allowing apple producers to keep more of their profit, the supply line would shift right from S1 to S2. In short, anything that allows producers to make greater profit will shift the supply line to the right. Anything that eats that profit up will shift the supply line to the left. The O stands for other goods that could be produced using basically the same resources. So assume, for example, that many apple growers also raise cherries. They use the same machinery, same pesticides, same farm fields, could easily be used for either product. Farmers want to grow the product that gives them the most profit. So for example, if the price of cherries were to fluctuate, it would affect farmers' willingness to supply apples. If the price of cherries were to go up and therefore give growers a greater profit, the supply of apples would shift from S1 to S3. Since growers would cut down apple trees and plant cherry trees in order to take advantage of the greater profits in cherries. If, however, the price of cherries were to fall, growers might plow under cherry trees, plant more apple trees, and then we would see a shift from S1 to S2. In short, producers will shift production into whichever item allows them to make the greatest profit. The T stands for technology or productivity. If apple growers instituted new computer software that better managed their apple groves and therefore gave them greater profitability, we would see a shift from S1 to S2. If that computer system were to crash, hurting their profitability, we would see a shift from S1 to S3. Technology is not in widespread use in the production of apples, but for most goods is a pretty significant factor. So adopting technology almost always leads to greater profitability and an increase in supply. The second T stands for taxes. The government can take away some of the profit of the apple producers through taxes, or it can allow apple producers to keep more of their profit by reducing taxes. So if the tax on apples were to be cut, giving apple growers a greater profit, the supply would shift from S1 to S2. If taxes were to be raised on apples, we would see a shift from S1 to S3. The opposite of a tax is a subsidy. That's when the government pays you to produce an item. If subsidies were to be boosted on apples, apple growers would seek the greater profit and shift from S1 to S2 to take advantage of those subsidies. If subsidies were to be cut, however, we would see a shift from S1 to S3. The E stands for expectations, and there are many varieties that expectations could come in. Expectations for profitability, for example, or future prices. So let's say that farmers expected apples to be more expensive at a certain point in the year. They might store their apples now in a cold cooler to bring them to market later to take advantage of those higher prices. So, for example, if farmers now expect prices to be higher in the future, the supply of apples now would shift from S1 to S3, since farmers would store them and sell them later. If, however, apple growers expected the prices to fall in the future, they may seek to bring all of their apples to market now, represented by a shift from S1 to S2. In short, you want to sell your product whenever the price is highest. And our general assumption is that most products can be stored and brought to market later. So think about this graph as representing the market right now. You are bringing more to market now, S2, or less to market now, S3, depending on your expectations for future prices. The N stands for number of suppliers. If farmers who had previously grown corn or wheat shifted to apple production, the number of suppliers would increase, reflected by a shift from S1 to S2. If, however, a number of apple growers cut their trees down, plowed the stumps under, and planted corn, we would see a shift from S1 to S3. In conclusion, a change in supply represents an increase or a decrease in the supply of a product at all price levels. It results from 6 variables, R, O, T, T, E, and N, outside of the market, which affect producers' willingness to supply more, S2, or less, S3, at all price levels.